This is the only horror movie that made my hands and feet go numb, because it boldly shows taboo scenes like monks breaking their vows. It was heavily censored before release and rated 20+ restricted. After watching, you'll understand. Sometimes, what truly makes your scalp tingle is not those clay or wooden statues, but the hearts of people wearing monk robes. The story begins with a drunken man, M, relying on the fact that he was an atheist, while urging the villagers to save, and follow, curse the god statue at the top of his lungs. As night fell, just as the man was sitting on the wooden bridge by the river fishing, he suddenly felt a cold gust of wind behind him. He turned around sharply and saw a blurry, eerie black shadow slowly approaching him, step by step. The man was scared out of his wits. He turned and ran. In his panic, he missed a step and fell into the gap of the wooden bridge. His calf was tightly wedged between the wooden planks. He struggled desperately to pull his leg free, but no matter how hard he tried, it was completely useless. Just as he was desperately calling for help, his body suddenly lost control. Trembling, he picked up the fishing hook beside him, aimed it at his own eye, and viciously hooked it in. Then he took the other end of the hook and forced it down his throat into his stomach. And this man never knew until he died that what he had offended was not an ordinary statue, but the doll god that the entire village had worshipped for 100 years. The price of angering the god is eternal damnation. This eerie village is located on a remote island in Thailand. The villagers here all worship the doll god. They have a bone-chilling custom. After a loved one dies, they mix the deceased's ashes into special wood to craft lifelike dolls one by one. Then they place them deep in the forest or on the family altar at home. The villagers firmly believe that doing so allows the soul of the deceased to be protected by the doll god. As long as they worship day and night, the deceased can soon be resurrected and reborn, and in the next life, be born into a good family. That day, a young man from out of town, named Tham, came to the village to find his brother. Tham's brother had come to Sing Tham Temple 4 years earlier to become a monk, and had never returned home since. Even phone contact had been lost. To find out what happened to his brother, Tham traveled all the way to this isolated island. As soon as he arrived at Sing Tham Temple, Tham met the temple's abbot, Luang For Nern. From Luang For Nern, Tham learned that his brother had killed the abbot and fled to avoid punishment. Tham refused to believe it. He felt there must be some hidden truth. So he begged Luang For Nern to let him stay in the temple, to search for his brother himself. Luang For Nern hesitated for a moment, but eventually agreed. He told the temple's novice monk to take Tham to an empty room. On the way, the novice told Tham that the temple runs on a generator for electricity. Every night, at 9 o'clock, the generator stops working. He specifically warned Tham not to go out at night, because night is when the ghosts are active. Tham was an atheist, so he completely dismissed all this talk of ghosts and God. To him, the novice's words were pure nonsense. But when he stepped into his room, he still couldn't help but shiver. There were faint footprints on the floor. The novice explained they were probably left by the monk who stayed here before, and told Tham not to worry about them. After settling in, while Tham was walking around the temple grounds, he realized how truly strange this island was. Every day, besides farming and working, the villagers gathered at the temple to worship the statues. Some even mumbled to the dolls in their own homes, and performed strange gestures, as if they were conducting some kind of ritual. At 9 o'clock sharp, the lights in the room went out. Tham took out the candle he had brought and lit it. Just then, he suddenly caught a glimpse of his brother's figure flashing past. Tham didn't think twice. He flung the door open and rushed out. Tham shouted as he chased after the figure, but the figure acted as if he hadn't heard a thing, and walked faster and faster. Just as Tham was about to catch up, a doll suddenly moved. Tham was so frightened he froze in place. He took out his flashlight and examined it carefully, but then he heard a noise behind him. Just as Tham turned to look at the doll behind him, another eerie sound rang out. It turned out everything had just been a dream, but the dream felt far too real. His back was already soaked in cold sweat. The next day, Tham was in the temple court when he met a young man named Jet. Jet was a simple-minded boy. The moment he saw Tham, he greeted him warmly. and invited him to eat together. Just then, Novice Kun walked over with another novice. He saw Jet eating a bowl of plain rice, and immediately snatched the bowl away. He dumped every dish on the table that Jet hated into the bowl, and forced Jet to eat it all. Tham couldn't stand watching anymore. He stepped forward and stopped Novice Kun. The two immediately started fighting. Just then, a monk with a crew cut walked over. Seeing them fighting, he scolded Jet without even asking what happened. He also warned Tham that if he caused any more trouble in the temple, he would be thrown out. Tham felt deeply wronged, but he could only swallow his anger. In the afternoon, a girl named Mina came to the temple to bring food for her brother. Novice Kun had always liked Mina. When he learned that her mother had been bedridden for years, and no doctor could help her, he took a small doll from his pocket and handed it to Mina, saying it could cure her mother's illness. Although Mina didn't really trust Novice Kun, seeing his sincere expression and thinking of her mother's suffering, she finally accepted the doll. Mina never imagined that this ordinary-looking doll would become the start of her nightmare. That same night, Mina placed the doll beside her mother's bed and prayed devoutly. Then she went back to her room to sleep. In the middle of the night, she suddenly felt her whole body convulsing, as if something was controlling her limbs. Mina's aunt heard the noise and rushed over. Seeing Mina like that, she was terrified. Luckily, the neighbor next door heard the commotion and realized she had been cursed with black magic. He told the aunt to take Mina to Luang For Nern right away. The aunt didn't dare waste any time. She and the neighbor immediately took Mina to Tham Temple. Luang For Nern saw Mina's condition and ordered someone to bring a basin of clear water. He dripped the water onto the hands of the Buddha statue, then let it slowly run down the statue's palm into Mina's mouth. Miraculously, before long, Mina started to respond. But just as Luang For Nern was about to continue the ritual to fully remove the curse from her, Tham suddenly burst in.
หลวงนะพอแล้วมีนาจะไม่ไหวแล้วหยุดขวางอาตมาอย่างที่พระทีพี่ชายของโยมเคยทำเลย
While the two were arguing, Mina suddenly stood up from the floor and violently kicked over the nearby Buddha statue. Everyone in the temple cried out in shock. They believed Mina had offended the Buddha and would surely be punished. Seeing that Mina had completely lost control, they had to restrain her and carry her back home. Mina's mother had no choice but to lock her in the bedroom. But even through the thin door, they could still hear loud banging. Tham knew something was wrong. He opened the door and stepped inside. Mina was kneeling in the corner, violently smashing her head against the wooden wall. She was laughing eerily the whole time. Tham was about to rush over and stop her, when Mina suddenly lunged at him.
มีนา
Right after that, Mina burst out of the house like a wild beast that had lost all control. She ran straight into the depths of the forest and knelt before a massive doll god statue. Everyone believed this was the doll god punishing Mina. Only Tham still refused to believe it.
มึงออกมาเจอกูดิ
In that instant, all the dolls in the surrounding forest suddenly started moving on their own. Just then, a man named Brack came rushing over. Seeing the scene in front of him, his face turned pale as he shouted, "If you dare to destroy the statue before you, not only will you suffer retribution, the entire village will be cursed." Although Tham didn't believe in ghosts or gods, seeing the eerie scene around him, he still lowered his stick. But just as he was about to turn away, his body suddenly dropped to its knees against his will. His eyes turned blood red. He frantically grabbed a stone from the ground and slammed it hard into his own hand. Brack quickly took out the protective amulet he always carried and placed it on Tham. After a long moment, Tham slowly regained his senses. After what had just happened, Tham no longer dared to dismiss the village's ghost stories. Together with Brack, he carefully repaired the broken arm of the statue. But the strange events were far from over. The next morning, Mina's brother found her body by the river. The cause of her death was extremely bizarre. There wasn't a single wound on her body. To honor Mina, Brack crafted a doll in her exact likeness and placed it in front of Mina's house. When Jet saw the doll of Mina, a deep sadness filled his heart. Suddenly, he noticed inside Mina's room a doll with a strange design. Brack spotted it, snatched the doll away at once, ran straight to the riverbank, and threw it into the water. Because this was a witchcraft doll, anyone who became entangled with it would lose their life without exception. To save his own life, Tham obediently ran back to the giant statue and kowtowed devoutly to apologize. After completing this life-saving ritual, Tham finally felt a little more at ease. But just as he was casually heading home, a nauseating stench suddenly hit his nose. Tham pinched his nose and followed the smell to a large tree. Hidden under the pile of leaves was a corpse that had been completely skinned. When the villagers arrived, they fought back their nausea and looked closely, only to discover, in horror, that this skinned corpse was none other than Novice Kun, who had been missing for days. Beside him lay Mina's bracelet. Everyone now believed Novice Kun had killed Mina. But who had killed Novice Kun? Tham wanted to call the police, but the village chief refused. He said if the news spread, no one would dare come to the temple to worship anymore. Yet the string of deaths that followed in the village made Tham realize things were far more complicated. To confirm his suspicions, Tham decided to investigate the forest himself. Deep in the woods, he unexpectedly discovered a cave sealed tightly with iron mesh. Tham tried to get closer to see what was inside, but at that moment, Luang For Nern suddenly appeared behind him and warned that the forest was very dangerous. It was easy to get lost otherwise. Tham found Luang For Nern's reaction highly suspicious. There had to be a secret hidden in that cave, but with Luang For Nern staring at him, he couldn't continue his search. He had no choice but to leave for now. Back at the temple, Tham went looking for Brack. He wanted to talk to him about the cave, but when he reached Brack's place, he found Brack wasn't home. Just as he was about to leave, he noticed something in the corner covered by a black cloth move slightly. Tham's heart skipped a beat. He walked over and lifted the black cloth. Inside was a doll made to look exactly like his brother. Just as Tham stood there in shock, Brack is back. He sees Tham has found the doll. Brack knows he cannot hide it anymore, so he tells Tham the truth. It turns out, Tham's brother has always opposed the monks in the temple, using the dolls to make money. He felt this behavior violated Buddhist faith. The brother originally wanted to team up with Brack to stop it, but Brack feared rejection from the temple and villagers. So, he refused the brother's proposal. Tham is devastated upon learning the truth. But what he does not know is that boneless doll made by Novice Kun has already targeted him. In the following days, Tham frequently falls into illusions. He always sees Novice Kun's ghost demanding his life. Several times he nearly dies. Luckily, Brack discovers it in time and uses another boneless doll to substitute for Tham. This lets him escape disaster. Brack tells Tham the boneless doll has a special crafting method. It uses the living human body as raw material. Dolls made this way are exceptionally powerful. To completely resolve the hidden danger, Tham and Jet together return to the vicinity of that suspicious cave. Just as they figure out how to open the iron net, the village chief suddenly appears. Without a word, he knocks Tham out. When Tham wakes up again, he finds himself tied to a pillar in the cave, and the culprit is Luang For Nern in front of him. Luang For Nern tells Tham he is not a monk at all, but an evil sorcerer. Years ago, because he killed many people, he hid on this remote island. Disguised as the temple's abbot, Tham's brother discovered his true identity and the secret of making dolls, so he silenced him by murder. Turned the brother into a doll. Just as Luang For Nern is about to act, Brack arrives with several righteous monks from the village, saving Tham. Tham immediately tells the villagers about Luang For Nern's crimes. The villagers cannot believe it. The Luang For Nern they have always respected is such an evil person. But before everyone can react, Luang For Nern starts chanting a spell. With the chanting, Novice Kun's voodoo doll suddenly emerges from the cave depths, lunging at Tham and the others. This boneless doll has immense strength. The villagers are no match for it. Soon, several people are injured by the doll. In the critical moment, Tham remembers the protective amulet Brack gave him and puts it on the doll. Luang For Nern sees his doll destroyed and flies into a rage. He chants another spell. This time, the doll sealing Tham's brother's soul steps out. The doll tightly grabs Tham's hair with both hands, as if to dismember him. Tham looks at his brother's doll, his heart filled with pain. He cannot bear to hurt his brother. At this critical moment, Jet, standing nearby, suddenly rushes forward, grabs Luang For Nern, and viciously tears his mouth, preventing him from chanting anymore. They think this will stop the doll, but the doll does not stop moving. Tham looks at his brother's doll, crying out his brother's name. expressing years of longing and searching for him. A miracle happens. Under Tham's call, the doll's movements slowly stop. A flash of clarity in its eyes. The brother's soul seems awakened. Then it dissipates into the wind soon after. Afterwards, Tham builds a new doll for his brother. This doll represents peace and protection. He places the doll in the temple, hoping his brother's soul finds rest. After everything settles, Tham plans to leave this painful island. He remembers Jet always wanted to visit Bangkok, so he decides to take Jet along. But Tham never dreamed that this seemingly simple-minded, honest Jet is the real mastermind behind the entire incident, the most insidious and brutal killer. Just as Tham and Jet were preparing to set off, Brack was in an abandoned warehouse and discovered a little monk who was locked up. This little monk was the youngest in the temple, who suddenly disappeared a few days ago. The little monk told Brack, especially the process of making dolls in the cave, scared him so much that he ran away quickly. But just as he was about to run out of the warehouse, Jet suddenly appeared. The little monk thought Jet would help him, but unexpectedly Jet knocked him unconscious and locked him in the warehouse. And this abandoned warehouse was actually Jet's secret hideout. Brack carefully searched the warehouse and found another voodoo doll. This doll was the one Mina had enshrined before her death. The little monk told Brack that what Novice Kun gave to Mina was actually a protective doll. It wouldn't harm anyone. It was Jet who secretly swapped the two dolls. His purpose in doing so was to get Mina. But when Jet tried to forcibly take Mina, Novice Kun suddenly appeared. During the fight, the two accidentally knocked Mina into the nearby river. Mina couldn't swim and drowned on the spot. Seeing this, Novice Kun wanted to bring Jet before Luang Fornern to let Luang Fornern seek justice for Mina. But Jet had been abused by Luang Fornern since childhood and was very afraid of him, fearing he would be beaten to death. So during the argument, he accidentally killed Novice Kun. Not only that, the little monk also told Brack that the fat monk hanged from the tree in the temple was also killed by Jet. After the truth came out, everyone was terrified. No one expected that the seemingly most innocent and harmless Jet actually hid such a dark side. But at this moment, Tham had already taken Jet and left the island, sitting on a small boat heading to Bangkok. Tham was still excitedly telling Jet about the prosperity of Bangkok, completely unaware that the person sitting next to him was a killer. And this small island, after experiencing so much bloodshed, returned to its former tranquility. But those dolls in the forest seemed to be stained with the color of blood, silently watching every person who comes here in the darkness, waiting for the next victim.